My daughter came home one day and told me she had made a new friend at drama club who had the same last name as us, the same color eyes as her father, and the same father's name. She was 13 years old and had no idea what she had just told me. My name is Claire, and at the time this all began, I had been married to my husband David for 14 years. We had one daughter together, Lily, who was 13, bright and dramatic in the best possible way, exactly the kind of kid who belongs in a theater class. She had been going to the after-school drama program at the local arts center for about 2 months when she came home one Thursday evening in October, dropped her bag by the door, and started talking before she even took her shoes off. That was normal for Lily. She processed everything out loud, always had. She told me about a girl named Sophie who had joined the group that week. They had been paired together for a scene exercise, and somewhere in the middle of rehearsing they had started comparing notes about themselves the way teenagers do, swapping details about their lives, their families, their pets. And somewhere in that conversation, Lily had found out that Sophie's last name was the same as ours. That her father's name was David. And that she had these unusual green-gray eyes that Lily described as exactly the same shade as her dad's, the kind of color that people always commented on, rare enough that Lily had grown up hearing about it her whole life. I remember standing at the kitchen counter while she talked, chopping vegetables for dinner, and my hand just stopped. I didn't say anything for a moment. I asked Lily to tell me again, slowly, what she had said. She repeated it without any sense of alarm because to her it was just an interesting coincidence, a funny thing that had happened, the kind of story that makes good dinner conversation. She said Sophie seemed really nice, a little quiet but funny once you got to know her, and that they had already exchanged numbers and were planning to sit together at the next session. I smiled and told her that sounded lovely. And then I finished making dinner, and I sat at the table with her and David, and I said almost nothing for the rest of the evening. David was a project manager for a construction firm, the kind of job that took him away for stretches of time when large builds were underway in other cities. We had met in our mid-20s through mutual friends, dated for 2 years, and then gone through a rough patch just before our engagement that I had spent a long time trying to forget. We had argued badly about something I can't even clearly remember now, and we had separated for about 3 months. He had gone traveling, the kind of trip people take when they need distance, somewhere in the south of the country, a coastal town he had never been to before. When he came back, we talked, and we made things right, and 6 months later we were married. I had always been glad that we found our way back to each other. The years that followed were good years, genuinely good, the kind of marriage that isn't perfect but feels real and solid. We had Lily, we built a life together, and whatever had happened in those 3 months apart I had long since filed away as the difficult chapter before the story got better. But that Thursday evening, standing at the kitchen counter, something I had never had any reason to question suddenly felt very different. The last name. The name David. The green-gray eyes. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark next to my husband and ran the details through my mind again and again, telling myself there were 100 explanations, that it was a common enough last name, that lots of people were named David, that green-gray eyes weren't so unusual. But I kept coming back to the combination of all 3 things together, and the fact that Sophie had joined the drama group the same year she turned 13, which was the same year that, by my calculation, would have been conceived during those 3 months David was traveling. By morning I had talked myself into waiting. I would meet Sophie first. I would see for myself before I said anything or asked anything or turned something that might be nothing into something that couldn't be undone. 2 weeks later, Lily asked if Sophie could come over after drama club. I said yes. Sophie walked through my front door on a Friday afternoon, and I understood immediately why Lily had been so excited about this friendship. She was warm and easy to talk to, with a quick smile and a thoughtful way of answering questions that made her seem older than 13. She and Lily fell immediately into the comfortable rhythm of 2 people who had already decided they were going to be friends, finishing each other's sentences, laughing at references I didn't understand. And she had David's eyes. Not similar. Not reminiscent. Identical. That specific shade of green-gray that I had looked into across 1,000 dinners and quiet Sunday mornings and difficult conversations over 14 years of marriage. I stood in my own hallway and looked at a 13-year-old girl I had never met before and felt the floor shift underneath me in a way I had no words for. I held it together for the 3 hours they were there. I made them snacks, I asked Sophie polite questions about school and her interests, I laughed at the right moments. When her mother picked her up at the door, I looked at the woman collecting her daughter and understood immediately that she knew nothing about us. She was friendly and grateful and completely unguarded, the face of someone who had no reason to be on alert. I smiled and said Sophie was welcome back any time. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a long moment before I went to find David. He was in the living room when I walked in and sat down across from him and told him I needed him to tell me about the 3 months he spent traveling before we got married. I kept my voice even. I asked him directly if anything had happened with anyone during that time that I didn't know about. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he looked down at his hands, and I had my answer before he said a single word. He told me everything. There had been a woman he met at a small hotel in a coastal town, a brief connection during a time when he was lost and hurting and far from home. It had lasted less than 2 weeks. He had come home, we had reconciled, he had told himself it was over and buried. And then, about 4 months after our wedding, he had received a message telling him that the woman was pregnant and that the child was his. He had made a decision without telling me. He had been sending money privately every month for 13 years, had met Sophie a handful of times when travel took him near enough to where she lived, had carried the entire thing in silence because he told himself that telling me would only cause damage that couldn't be repaired. He said he had loved both of his daughters from the moment he knew they existed, and that the only thing he had failed at was the courage to be honest. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I told him I needed time, and I meant it in the most complete way possible. I went to stay with my sister for 10 days, and I took Lily with me, and I told her only that her father and I were working through something difficult and that she hadn't done anything wrong. Those 10 days were some of the hardest of my life. I was angry in the deep, exhausting way that has nothing dramatic about it, the kind of anger that sits quietly in your chest and makes everything feel heavy. But underneath the anger there was something else that I kept coming back to, something I hadn't expected to feel. David had known about Sophie since before Lily could walk. He had supported her every month for 13 years without being asked to continue, without any legal requirement, purely because he believed it was the right thing. He had never walked away from her. And however wrong his silence had been toward me, his consistency toward that child was something I couldn't dismiss. On the 10th day I called him and asked him to come to my sister's house. We sat in her garden and talked for 3 hours, the most honest conversation we had ever had, including things that had nothing to do with Sophie and everything to do with the years of distance that had quietly accumulated between us without either of us naming it. By the end of it, I wasn't sure about everything, but I was sure I wasn't ready to end the marriage without trying first. We came home. We spent another month in careful, quiet rebuilding, the kind that doesn't happen all at once. And then we made a decision together about Sophie and Lily, that they deserved to know the truth, not a version of it, not a softened summary, but the real thing, explained by the adults who had created the situation. We arranged to meet on a Saturday afternoon, all 5 of us, at a neutral place, a park near the arts center where the girls had first met. Sophie's mother came too, and I want to say that meeting her properly for the first time was one of the stranger experiences of my life. 2 women sitting across from each other who had every reason to be enemies and somehow weren't. We had both been dealt an incomplete hand by the same man, and we had both, in our different ways, kept going. David spoke first, to both girls together, and he told them the truth plainly and without excuses. Sophie already knew he was her father, had always known, but had never known about Lily. Lily sat very still while he talked, and I watched her face move through about 7 different emotions in the space of 2 minutes. And then Sophie reached over and took Lily's hand and said, very quietly, that she had always wanted a sister. Lily looked at her for a long moment, and then she said that was actually the weirdest and best thing that had ever happened to her. The adults at the table all exhaled at the same time. The girls have been inseparable since that afternoon. They look so alike that strangers assume they are twins, and they have stopped correcting people because they find it funnier not to. Every few weeks we all have dinner together, the whole strange assembled group of us, and it is awkward sometimes and easy sometimes and always, always real. David and I are still married. We are still working on things, because that's what 14 years and one enormous secret and 2 daughters who adore each other actually looks like in real life. It isn't simple. But then again, neither is any of this. Last Saturday Lily came downstairs after a 2-hour phone call with Sophie and announced that they had decided they were going to do their drama class final performance together, playing twins. She said it like it was the most obvious idea in the world. I told her I thought that was a perfect plan.